In this coffee talk, Pastor Pascale Williams, our discipleship pastor, and Pastor Ken Chapman, our children's and youth pastor, discuss ways for you to create a healthy spiritual environment in your home.
One more question.
All right, one more
for
left.
You.
Okay, I'm ready.
Oh, this is good. How do you create a healthy spiritual environment in the home? How do you do it?
Okay, so that's a good question. How do I create a spiritual environment? So the way I see it, and at least how we do it in my household, is I lead everything I do in seeking the Lord. As a spiritual leader in my household, I share that responsibility with my wife in a lot of ways, right? As we've kind of talked about. But it's important to all of us that I am able to clearly hear from the Lord. So I have prioritized, and just in recent years, God has really led me down this path of prioritizing my time with Him. Because when you're a parent and you have kids in school, and I mean, I look at we have a dry erase calendar at my house, and it's daunting. My wife fills it out for the month, just going through the calendar, and just the stuff we know is coming. You look at it, and I know a lot of parents can resonate with this. It is like, whew, how are we possibly going to do all this stuff in just the course of 30 days or 31 days? So for me, it's making sure that I prioritize that time with the Lord, that one-on-one time where I get into the Word, where I really seek Him, and where I would just love on Him and allow Him to love on me. And in those moments, because I've gone through those periods in my life where I'm like, God, I'm the leader. I need to know what's coming. I got to have vision. Give me vision. And there's times to pray for that and times to press in. But I've found I get so much vision from just seeking God and just like a parent, like a relationship. Right. Like when you talked about my daughter, Charlotte, when I come home and my boys are a little bit older, but they're 12 and 9, and they still love to see me, but they're starting to get to that age where they're like into something when I get home, and they might not immediately come greet me at the door, but my daughter's still like right there. Her and my dog, right? They're like right there, thrilled to see me walk in the door. And I find that just like that, when you want to be that to God, right? Because just like a parent, when there's something in you that just just melts.
Yes.
When those people, they're excited to see you be there. They want you there. You're as important to them as anything. And that's what I feel like that is such a critical component to being a good spiritual leader, is recognizing where you get your authority from. I'm not an authority in my life, in my household. I am by virtue of who I am and the position that I have kind of legally in the family. Right. But I receive my ability to lead well from God. And I follow His example. And I try to, as best as I can, get everything that I need to lead from Him. If I look at it, 9 times out of 10, you're getting it out of the Scripture, right? You're reading it, you're getting insight from the Holy Spirit. And sometimes it's just in your prayer and God settling something on your heart. I pray about tough situations. Sometimes you just use wisdom, and if it's a simple thing, but sometimes there's tough, where I don't have the answer, right?
Do you include Mel? Like when are the times when you're hearing from, when do you know when to include Mel?
I include her in actually every decision. Even if it's one where I said, well, here's what I feel like we're supposed to do. Because it's a partnership. Right, we are partners in this. We are both parents. We are both have equal authority in the sense of the children. Like I don't play the game, and maybe if parents are listening, I never play the game of, because kids are going to try to do, well, Dad said no, let me grab Mom, and we're going to create some. Yeah. So that's like critical, like one-on-one parent stuff, especially as they get older and they really learn how to kind of manipulate a situation. Kids will try. Is you really got to be on the same page, and that begins spiritually. And you'd be amazed because you start to seek the other person too. So I get God's input, but I really want to know what my wife thinks because she's really smart. She has an incredible take on things, and God designed us, right? We're all not the same person for a reason. Is I need what you have, right? And I can make good decisions on my own. I can draw from my own experience and from the Holy Spirit and all of these things. But it's really critical that to use the people God put around me, right? So we have these circles of people that have influence in our lives for a reason, and that includes your spouse or your, whoever that might be in your life. Where I lean heavily on her for like, hey, here's what I'm thinking. I think we're going to go this way, and she respects that. And we've grown in 19 years of marriage. It wasn't always easy, and this is a learned thing, right? You have to intentionally growth and care into it. but she wants me to make the decision, right? She has input.
She must trust you, right? Because
Yes.
that's the other thing too. She wants to, because Melody's, like you said, is very bright, very smart. So she trusts that you are able to make that decision.
Yes,
I'm sure.
And then you also have to not, and if you're on that side of it, you have to not jump the I told you so train of like if something doesn't go the way you thought it was, because it's not always going to. You can hear from God all day, but there's human execution, right? So we don't always get everything just right. And that's where the greatest learning is, right? Is in making mistakes and in quote unquote failing, which is really you're failing up, right? You're failing up because
what do you
that way.
Mean by that for those who are listening?
And you probably have heard that term before from other people. It's certainly not something I coined, but failing up is you are failing forward. You can say as well. It's you are attempting something with the intention of growth.
Right.
And if you are going to fail in something as a not hit the mark, so to speak, not that you're sinning, but that you're attempting something and maybe it doesn't happen like you want. Maybe there might be some consequences you didn't foresee, but you're learning from it. And it's almost like a step, right? It's going upstairs is difficult.
Yes.
I don't care how in good shape you are. You might be able to take 3 steps at a time, but it still takes physical exertion to be able to move up. But you gain ground every time you do. Doesn't mean it's easy, but you gain ground.
So let me ask you this question. As a spiritual leader, no one's perfect. Are you hard on yourself if you ever make a decision that you feel like, oh my gosh, this was not the right decision? How do you handle that? What do you do as a spiritual leader?
I do both. If I'm being perfectly honest,
sure, we want to hear honesty.
I tend to be harder on myself than I really need to be because I expect a lot of myself. Oftentimes so much so where I really rely on my wife to balance me there.
Yeah.
Something God has brought me through though, and learning more about this is he's like, well, you're supposed to fail, right? Like, and again, failing is, I use air quotes because it's not a fail. Failing is such a final, it's like you failed and it's done. Really, it's not. Failing and learning, right? You can almost say, I learned,
Failing
right?
is learning. Yes.
So it worked out. No, it didn't work out at all, but I learned, right? It's like that famous, was it Thomas Edison quote where he's like, I learned, I didn't fail. I just learned 400 something ways not to make a light bulb, right? It's like, I love that quote because and I also love, there's a quote, I believe it's Mike Tyson who said, everybody's got a plan until they get hit in the face, right? So you got a plan, of attack, this is going to work. And then life hits you and you're like, now what, right?
Yes.
So it's being able to kind of feel that. So I tend to be a little harder on myself than I need to be. But God is teaching me through my wife, through people around me, even through my position at the church, that it's okay. That I'm going through, it's something to learn, but it's never done out of impure intent.
Right.
So to me,
keeping the heart pure is important.
Yes. So if you can keep your heart right, Pastor Lee Wilson, who's at our church, he is one of my great friends and mentors, and he always says, in everything you do, keep your heart right. Because even if it's a difficult situation, if you know your heart is right, even if you're going through a hard time, at least you know your center is correct, right? You are on a good foundation. Even if the wind is blowing and the hail is smacking against the side of the house, your foundation's strong. You're going to have to weather some storms. And this is true in the home as well, in spiritual leadership. Just because you have it right doesn't mean it's going to be easy.
Right.
And it won't be, in fact, because the more connected you are and the more right direction that you're moving, the more the devil's going to try to bring against you and your family, to try to test that foundation, to try to knock over that thing that God's building. And it's on us as spiritual leaders and authorities in our homes. This is including families, moms and dads, everybody who has a seat at the table, so to speak, to maintain that foundation, knowing that adversity is going to come. It's not going to be constant, but it will come. And to lean on God, to lean on each other, it becomes kind of an amazing support network in that.
Yeah, that's so good. Ken, can you share with us a little bit about some of the challenges that spiritual leaders in the home, men, especially today in our culture, men, women, the roles of men and women in our society. Do you think it's more difficult these days for a man to assume that leadership position? Do you think that I'm just asking you as a man, where women are questioning or wanting to usurp or take that position? What would you say about that?
Sure. So that's a very interesting question, and there's a lot of prongs to it. I think at face value, the role of masculinity, not even necessarily men per se, as like the gender or the sex, but masculinity very much has become frowned upon because it was portrayed as being something that it isn't, right? Masculinity, we have this term toxic masculinity, right, which is making the rounds. Masculinity, in ways, had become toxic in a lot of how men were presented, both in popular media as well as how they believe they should be behaving. But masculinity really is a gift from God. It is our way of being. Whether it be portraying strength or leaning on our men being physically strong or however you want to look at that, that is a strength of ours to be able to, and masculinity actually helps process certain things, certain difficulties, certain information where you might need to tackle a situation. And that might be you might need to put your gloves up and walk forward. Right. Whereas in a feminine way, that's a different way of dealing with things. Yes. Neither one is right or wrong, but God designed masculinity to be put men in the ability to attack or to defend, but be a front line. And it makes sense that that's something the devil would attack. Right. It really does, because if you remove masculinity from the larger conversation and from the popular culture and make it almost seem poisonous, you are now removing the initial defense of people, of the family, of really the fabric of society. Right. Because when you feminize men, and again, this is not to say that women are not powerful, strong, important, and I hope people can understand what I'm saying. But it's in the destruction of masculinity, and you bring femininity to the forefront, it brings things off balance. Because there's masculinity and femininity. One's not better than the other. It's a balance. Everything in life should be a good balance. Right. And just like the pendulum swings politically, right? We go back and forth depending on the era and where people are at. You see that with this, but as a man, it's important and critical for me to understand, number one, the role of my wife. I can't do what she can do.
And you're secure in who she is and who you are.
1,000%. Right? And I'm secure in my role. Yes. And that's important. Masculinity is not everything. Right. It's part of the equation. Right. It's an ingredient, but it is not the entire cake. Right. Right? We all have a role to play. And being a leader does not mean that you are the most important ingredient in the cake. Right. Because if you've ever had cake where you were missing some of the flour or missing some of the baking soda, it might seem like the simplest thing, and you were missing that thing, That's right. If you have side by side, you're like, oh, that cake's good. That something's not right. Can't put my finger on it. Something's off. And that is that way when you talk about masculinity, femininity, the role of the man and the woman in a relationship, in spiritual leadership overall. Yes. It's important to have all the ingredients and that they have their place and their measure. Right? And their measure. Baking is not, it's an exact science, right? Cooking is not. Cooking is throw a little bit of this, try this out. We've tried to make that apply across the board, and it doesn't. There's some things where the ingredients, the exact measurements are critical, and God designed it that way. Yeah, and knowing your place, I mean, it's like, I love the analogy about the cake, too much sugar. You may have all the ingredients, but too much of this is going to make it too sweet. Yeah. Or too much of that is going to make it too dry. So being secure, and we talked about boundaries, we talked about knowing your place, we talked about being secure. It's been really, really fun doing this with you. I really appreciate that answer. Yeah, and I hope that we get to continue this conversation and that this prompts other people to have these good conversations. This is great. Thank you, my friend. You got this.